Hey everyone, and welcome to this video. I'm just flipping to a page in my sketchbook that I have reserved for this drawing on how to draw a nose in oil pastel. So I've reserved this paper and this page in my sketchbook. It's a mixed media Strathmore paper. It's a toned gray, which I absolutely love painting or drawing with oil pastel on a toned gray paper, because that way you really already have those midtones in the paper and you can get your darks and highlights. So I'm using these Caran D'ache oil pastels. They're actually called Neo pastels, and they have 96 colors, and it is a very soft, very creamy pastel that has just a soft velvety texture. It has a matte appearance. There's no powder to it, unlike, the regular dry pastels, and it never dries out. There's great coverage. It has excellent light fastness, and these are the colors I'm going to use for drawing the nose. You can also use these pastels with turpentine. They are water resistant and they have good thermal stability, and it allows for unlimited shading and mixing. So I wanted to show you the colors that I'm actually using in oil pastels in case you want to create your own version of this video and also draw along with me and draw your own nose. So the first color I'm using is black, then we have bistre, then we have steel gray, cocoa, ochre brown, olive brown, cinnamon, English red, flame red, fast orange, salmon pink, salmon, granite rose, golden ochre, golden yellow, orangish yellow, and cream. So the lightest color that I'm using in the skin tone is the cream. I'm not using a bright white at all. I also always keep mineral oil close by, which you can use for mixing with oil pastels, and a little Q-tip so that I don't get my fingers too messy. I'm starting out with just an H pencil, and I'm going to sketch out the nose really quickly just in pencil before I get started. So the great thing about oil pastels is you can always layer and do thin layers at first and build up, but I still like to just kind of sketch out where my nose is going to be. And then I'm starting just with some of these light colors and mapping out kind of just the outlines of the nose and where it's going to be laid out on the paper. I'm going ahead and filling in some of the darkest values in the nose, but in a very light touch. So I'm not like pressing these pastels, crushing them into the paper and getting a lot of pigment on there right at first. I'm just using my oil and a very light touch to kind of stain the paper, actually, just kind of staining where these dark areas are. So that way I can easily go back on top and change it if something's not looking quite right as I continue drawing and getting all the elements of the nose down on the paper. So I'm using the brown color just to kind of map out the shadow that's around the nostril. So when you are drawing, you want to look at all the different shapes that you're seeing within the nose and around the nose. It's not just about, drawing this outline, because outlines don't really exist in real life when you are drawing realistically. So you want to see kind of just how these shadows are fading into each other, where they're mapped out, where they're placed, and try to just see these shadows and highlights in different shapes. So now I am mapping out the highlight on the bridge of the nose and the ball of the nose. I don't know if you can see in the graphite, but I did draw a big circle first, which is just where the ball of the nose is. And the brightest highlight is going to be in that center circle on the ball of the nose. And then it gradually kind of fades out. So I'm grabbing my salmon pink, which is a little bit of a darker pink, and just looking at the flesh. I'm looking at where the pinkest parts of the flesh are coming in around the cheeks, around the nose. This color is a nice darker pink color, and some of the shadows are, kind of existing in this pink, or they're blending into the pink. And so I'm just mapping out some oranges and some pinks as I'm noticing them in the skin tone. Again, I'm just using a very light touch with this very first layer of the oil pastel, because I don't want to be too confident with my strokes yet, just in case I want to change something. I really like going in with a light layer and then just kind of staining the paper with my oil or just kind of building up on top of it. So that's the nice thing about oils, is that you can do a lot of layers. So now I'm just using this brown color as the shadow of the nostril kind of fades out. It doesn't, the whole nostril, it doesn't say super dark or super black. It fades out towards the bottom and it kind of blends into the flesh of the bottom part of the nostril. And where the ball of the nose is, there are some highlights just in this pink color right before, you see that shadow of the nostril. So I'm making sure I'm getting that down and just trying to get all the values right. And I'm using my cotton swab with oil on it to just blend these colors together. That's the nice thing about oil pastels, is the way that they blend. They're just so creamy and smooth and just get that really flexible quality that you're seeing in the skin. I kind of like to work all over the page as I'm working, because you don't want to be too confident in one area and then when you compare it to the rest of the nose, realize it's a little bit off. So I like to skip around to different parts of the layout and of the composition to really see where these highlights and midtones and shadows are coming in, where there are bits of this yellow color. There's some yellow tones in the skin, and I'm blending that with the cream. Sometimes when you see highlights, it's not going to be a bright white. It's going to have a tint of a color. And just like here where I'm using this salmon pink, it's going to kind of blend in with the brown a little bit there. And that's okay. That's how, skin tones really are. They blend colors. And when you're looking at, your reference photo, or if you're drawing from life, you can really pay attention to that. And of course, as we add more layers, the initial layer of the shadow in the nostril and around the nostril are, getting darker. And, don't be afraid to use the colors that you're seeing. It may look a little bit weird. You may think, oh, the skin isn't this pink or it's not this orange. But as you start using it and as the rest of the paper gets filled in, it will start to look more natural. So now I'm just continuing to go around with this kind of peachy color and again, blending it out. I love working on this gray mid-tone paper because it really shows you just sort of that middle ground or that middle value where, you can really see when you put a highlight down right away, and you can see where you put a shadow down right away. And it's not as jarring as trying to work on, a blank white page. I am drawing this in a sketchbook that I made by hand using some bookbinding methods. And if you're interested in learning how to do that, you can check out my other video that I will link here below. Now I'm just using some orange and kind of going around the ball of this nose and realizing the edges need to be a little bit darker. I need to really fill in this highlight area. There are some, areas that are coming forward that are much brighter. But as I add more cream and the granite rose, it's really starting to come together. And again, I'm just using my cotton swab to blend this all together. When you see the oil hit the paper, it does look like a little bit darker, but that's just because it's looking wet. And once it dries, it's not going to be that dark. So I just really need to blend out these edges and make sure that the color is blending seamlessly and looking natural. I'm just using the orange and the salmon and the peach. And now I'm starting to fill in some of the color on the cheeks. This is going to really help set the nose in its environment and kind of give it more of a reference point in terms of the volume. The granite rose is a really great color, and so is the salmon pink, and just the way that it's kind of blending in with, you can definitely tone it down with some of your browns so that it's not quite so vibrant. When you're working with oil pastels as well, you do a lot of color mixing actually on the page. So unlike painting where you may mix your paints on a palette before you apply it to your canvas or paper, with oil pastels, your colors are just all being blended and mixed straight on the page. And so don't be afraid to put down a pure color. You can always come back on top and blend it out with another color. And I wouldn't worry about it, getting on your other colors. It's not going to ruin your pastels. It comes off right away. And if you need to, you can just wipe it off with a tissue paper if you need that pure color again, and it still has some of the residue. But typically I have not found that to be an issue. I'm just able to pick it up and go straight back into the drawing and keep working. You can also use your finger to blend out, as I'm doing here. The pastel does get on your finger, so it's not ideal. That's why I have the cotton swabs, but sometimes you're just, in the zone of what you're doing and you just want to use your finger and really like blend out the way you need to. So here I'm just blending out more with the cotton swab. I was kind of getting tired of, getting the pastel all over my fingers. And I do have those for a reason, so I decided to use it. Getting down that layer of color is just really helpful, when you're working all over the page and just being able to see how the cheek is related to the nose and how the nose is looking like it's volumetric and popping off the page against that cheek, and like what those values are and, what the color and shading should be, because you're using a lot of the same colors, right? But just, incorporating those shadows and highlights is really helping your nose, pop off of the face. Shadows also are not quite set. They kind of blend in and fade out. So that's a nice thing about oil pastels is it just is a medium that really lends itself to blending and like really blending in a smooth transitional way. So now I'm just going around the nostril and adding in kind of where I'm seeing those shadows on the nostrils. Sometimes it's in different places than you expect, right? Like you wouldn't expect the inside of the nostril to have that highlight right beside the shadow of the inside of the nostril, but it does. And sometimes you just need a little bit of a darker touch and to blend it out. There's so many different colors within the skin tone. All these different oranges and pinks and yellows really come together, in browns, and creams, and all the shading and highlights are full of color. And once you start to really study that and pay attention to it, it's really fun and interesting. As I'm a person who loves color, so there was a lot of yellow too around the eye. So I'm kind of just mapping out where these shadows are around the eyes and where I think the eyes are kind of going to sit on the page. It's good to measure too and kind of see like what's lining up. Like, is one eye a little bit lower than the other eye? That's kind of what I was dealing with, is one eye was showing up a little bit bigger on the page and the other one, it was really just a little tiny fraction of the corner of the eye. And the bigger eye was seeming to sit lower on the face just from the angle of my reference photo. So I didn't really draw this part out with the pencil. So I'm kind of just sketching it out with my oil pastel. So you don't have to use, graphite to do your initial sketch. If you don't want to, you can just start working directly on the paper. And, that's again, the nice thing about oil pastels is you can go over your mistakes to an extent. You just don't want to get too heavy when you are drawing. You want to keep a very light touch. And then you'll be able to go over it and layer and kind of correct things as you go. So there were some pretty big shadows like under the eye. Oh, you can see my pregnant belly there. And I'm noticing more shadows around the ball of the nose as well. It seems like, there is a little bit more definition here. And so I want to make sure that I'm getting that. Again, just adding a little more color, a little more pink, a little more brown is helping that highlight really pop out more and kind of get that better shape and better definition. So now I'm just filling in really the rest of the page where the cheek is, where this color is, and just getting this baseline down for the skin tone. I'm using the salmon pink as well as the salmon, and those just give really nice colors. And I can go in and add more orange and more yellow on top and more of the browns where there's some shadows. And I'm just filling in the rest of the bridge of the nose where it carries up and kind of spreads into the forehead. I also want to make sure I'm getting this angle right over on the left side where we're kind of seeing the bridge of the nose blend into the cheek. There is a shadow there, but it's very subtle. It's very particular. So I want to make sure I'm getting it right. So I keep adding, darker colors and then going back and adding the highlights and seeing like where they are. And we're also seeing some of these little freckles and texture in the skin where the highlights are coming in, these little dots. And yeah, the girl in my reference photo has a lot of freckles, so I'm hoping these don't end up looking like the measles. They probably do, but I was trying just to get some of the freckles in as well. If your freckles are looking too contrasty, you can go back with your finger or with the cotton swab too and just kind of blend them out a little bit more. And I probably should have done that because they are looking a little too contrasty now that I'm looking back at the footage. So yeah, just trying to get the bridge of this nose where it's blending into the forehead. It's not quite as light, but it's still light and has some shadows going around into the eyes, and also just trying to finish up this area around the left side of the ball of the nose in this nostril. It's definitely needs to be more defined, but it is a very, subtle shadow there. I also just like to keep my pastels out so that I know which ones I'm using. It's kind of key to use the same colors over and over again in your drawing for that consistency in your drawing and in the skin. And there's so many pastels, I don't want to necessarily put them back in their place, so I leave them out horizontal on top so I can just quickly grab them and use the same colors over and over again. So now I'm just filling in the eye, and there's a little bit of green, there's some brown, and then I'm adding some gray to the white of the eye. So usually the white of the eye isn't like a bright white. You want to make sure that it has appropriate shadows and is just the right value. It is a circle, or it is a sphere, your eyeball. So you want to make sure that it is volumetric, just like a sphere, and that, the center part is going to be coming forward, which is going to be the lightest part, but that happens to be the iris, which is also dark. But the corners of the eye are kind of retreating. And so they are going to have some shadow around them. So now I'm just, filling in this shadow under the eye, which is kind of brown and pink, and blending it out really smooth. It's always nice to have that base layer down, and then you can come in on top and add more detail. Just like these little highlights in the iris and in the eye that I'm using the cream color for. Again, not a bright white, but just the cream. The cream is really bright enough. Then I'm adding more highlights with the granite rose color and just coming in right beside it and adding the shadow lines as well. And just adding a little texture by dotting my pastels in the skin where I'm seeing, these little dots in the skin. Little highlights. It may be makeup, it may just be the way the skin is looking. Or now I'm taking the edge of my pastel and going in and adding these eyelashes. And you can get, these thin lines just by using the edge. I'm using the Bistra color, and then I'll go back in with a little bit of black, but I don't like to use too much black, only in like really dark shadow areas, like as a detail. Eyelashes kind of go every which way. They kind of end up being in clusters. And so you kind of want to draw them in going in different directions and then kind of crossing over each other as well. So now going on to the other eye, it's really just the corner of the white of the eye. So you'll see me adding those shadows, to get that shadow of the sphere where it's actually retreating away from the page. And you'll notice that I'm going back and forth. I'm going from one eye to the next eye. So now I'm just getting those shadows on the other eye, above the eye, so that we can kind of see where the eyelid is coming forward or going back, and just sort of blending that out as a kind of base layer. And then I can go in and add more detail. Now I can go back on top and add these little highlights. That's what I love about oil pastel, is that you can work kind of both ways. You can work in shadow and you can work into light. Really get that base layer down first. I'm still kind of seeing the gray of the paper show through on this cheek, so I'm just blending out this color a little bit more, and then I can go in and add more on top. Kind of blending it out to a smooth layer is going to give you a little more coverage. And I'm just seeing this texture come in, so I'm using the granite rose to come in over this cheek and just add a little bit more texture coming into that skin tone. This is a great transition color from these highlights, and it works really well as a highlight itself, and then just using the orange again to fill in some of these areas. The orange is a nice, kind of middle shadow color. And with all the yellow and light pink and cream, it tends to recede more. Now I'm going back with the granite rose on the bridge of the nose because I really want the ball of the nose to be what protrudes forward the most. That's my biggest highlight area. So I want to just make sure that these areas are, coming forward or moving back. And that's where you can just layer and layer until you're getting it right and it's looking correct. If you're feeling creative, you can also use non-traditional colors. You could use blues for more of the shadows. Blues and purples are cooler colors, which tend to recede. But I just chose to kind of do realistic colors for this lesson. And yeah, that's kind of the finished drawing. I hope you're liking it, and I hope it helped you learn how to draw noses. Drawing noses is not the easiest thing to draw in the world because it's such a weird shape, isn't it? It's such a weird little thing. And there's just lots of shading and lots of highlights on the nose, and some have to be lighter than others and some have to be darker than others. And just getting it right is not the easiest task in the world. But I think this turned out pretty well. I'm happy with the overall drawing. I just need to go back and maybe smudge these freckles in a little bit more. But I hope you learned a lot, and thanks so much for watching my channel. I hope that you will hit that like button and subscribe for more art tutorials from me. You can also look at all the art supplies I'm using on my resources page if you are interested in seeing kind of, what tools I'm using and what my favorites are. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video.